I was zesting oranges for a glaze when she told me I couldn't come. Not with tears or anger, just a clean, steady voice that sliced straighter than any knife. My ex is coming to solstice dinner, so you can't. The steam from the mulled cider fogged the kitchen window while my brain tried to translate the sentence into something that didn't rearrange every chair in my future. Her name was Sloane, 30, sunlight in shoes. A muralist who painted towering cranes along warehouse alleys and signed them with a gold thread only children noticed. We'd been together almost 2 years, and in that time I'd learned every squeak in her loft and each way she forgot to eat until she was shaking. My love language was planning, hers was improvisation. We told ourselves both were forms of faith. Solstice at her mother's house mattered. They had traditions. A quilted table runner stitched from dresses worn by grandmothers on first days of school. A teacup passed clockwise so each person could say one thing they'd set down before the year turned. Music from an old radio that only sounded clear if you pressed your thumb on the dial. I'd spent 3 weeks reconstructing her gray dance honeyed braids, testing them until the kitchen smelled like childhood had come back wearing boots. "Ari," she said, not looking at my lists, "I need space. Theo is coming for closure. Closure with a person who once took a sledgehammer to his own coffee table to make firewood art. Closure that required my chair." I put the zester down and wiped my hands the way chefs do before they fire a dish that no one will eat. "You want me to prep your family's dinner and not be there," I said, flat as parchment. "I want to not feel scheduled." That word had been creeping into our arguments like winter into windows with bad caulk. Scheduled. As if the presence of spare batteries and meal timelines were a net tightening around her ankle. I packed the cooled braids into tins, added beeswax wraps, labeled oven temperatures in pencil like a librarian of heat. She watched, arms crossed, chin high, someone brave enough to name a ghost and not brave enough to watch it exit. When the door closed, the apartment shuddered into a silence I didn't recognize. I'd imagined carrying those braids across her mother's threshold, catching the radio's static with a thumb, sitting next to Sloane while the teacup went warm to warm. Instead, I found a symmetry that hurt, a table set for one, and the understanding that the person who asks for space sometimes means a room without you in it. Heartbreak lives in the hands first. Mine needed tasks. I scrubbed the stove until the steel gave back my face in pieces. I relabeled spice jars because sometimes a clean serif is the closest thing to prayer. Acts of service have always been my grammar. The backup umbrella tucked into a stranger's hand at the bus stop, the extra charger in the glove compartment, the bandages in a tin shaped like a sardine that makes kids laugh before they stop bleeding. A week earlier, Sloane's mother had sent me a voice memo in which an old aunt sang the recipe in a warbling soprano, vowels rounded like dough. I tracked down a baker 3 neighborhoods over who remembered the trick with the citrus peel, found an imported flour with the right protein to resist collapsing into sadness. Each attempt a little closer to the way memory tastes when you get it right. When I delivered a test braid and her mom's eyes filled, I thought, this is what worth feels like, warm and shared. Theo, meanwhile, existed in Sloane's mouth like a new spice she was trying on, bright, reckless, catching in the back of the throat. "He drove to the coast at 1 a.m. to hear waves," she said, as if tides listened back. "He thinks calendars are cages." I had swallowed my response. Calendars are scaffolds, not prisons. But these last weeks, every scaffold in our home had been mistaken for a bar. The night of the Uninvited, I set the tins on the counter and wrote oven times on blue painter's tape. Then I opened the drawer where I kept passports and spare keys and laid the copied recipe inside. The pain felt like a wire pulled through my chest, thin, hot, purposeful. I made tea in the heavy mug I reserved for storms and told myself truth in simple terms. Love is logistics with tenderness built in, not a leash but a light in the hall so no one trips. I went walking. December had glazed the street in thin sugar ice. A woman was trying to carry 2 brown paper bags and a cello. I took one bag, tucked it to my hip like a baby, and walked her to the corner where the bus still stops even when it barely believes in itself. "Thank you," she said, those words weightless and full. "No problem," I answered, though the problem inside me was enormous and had teeth. On solstice morning, my phone became a lighthouse that only cast for storms I was not sailing. First, a photo. The braid rising, light like a halo. Then 15 degrees off, the crust split. Then oven died. Then he brought nothing. Then he asked if we had beer. Then he left for a fire in the dunes because a friend texted a bonfire emoji. I didn't reply. Language is an economy. I was done subsidizing poor investments. Instead, I went to the river trail with a camera I bought on a day I believed in permanence. The fog hung low like a low note from a cello. People spoke softer in that air, as if words could snap under the extra weight. I took pictures of a dog whose ears made decisions independent of the dog. My fingers remembered how to make the aperture trust me. In the distance, wood smoke from a fire someone tended on purpose. At dusk, my brother Eli called. He breathes like a runner even on the couch. "You okay?" he asked, which is a question people ask when they already know the answer. "Define okay," I said. He didn't laugh, but I could hear him nod. "You do the work others forget to do," he said. "Find people who notice." We ended up at a thrift store buying a jacket with someone else's name stitched inside. I wore it home anyway. It was heavy and knew how to keep a person. The last text came at midnight. A photo of the table, plates in their after-battle arrangement, candles guttering low, the teacup half full in the center like an eclipse. "Mom asked where you were," Sloan wrote. "I said you were giving me space, and because honesty sometimes comes late," she followed with, "I think I made the wrong kind." I put the phone face down and slept on the couch, like grief was a guest who needed the bed. Morning brought a kind of clean that isn't happiness but is not hurt. I made eggs and burnt the first batch because even the careful can forget. I chewed them anyway, because starting over tastes like ash the first time. Then I searched for repair cafes in the city and signed up for the Saturday shift. If I couldn't save a dinner, I could save a lamp. The community workshop was in a cinder block building 2 streets south of the soup kitchen and 1 north of the pawn shop, which is to say, perfectly located for redemption. On the first Saturday, a man brought in a space heater that rattled its faith. A woman carried a blender whose last smoothie was probably in another decade. Miss Alvarez hauled in a toaster that once belonged to her sister, silver, dented, stubborn. "Sometimes it holds the bread like it wants to keep it," she said. I opened the back and found a spring that had given up. Replacement springs are cheap. Courage to ask for help is not. We tested it together, both holding our breath while the toast rose like a small resurrection. Miss Alvarez laughed first, laughter like a kitchen when everyone is yelling and no one is angry. She wasn't the only one to return. Repair people become fixtures fast. Each week, someone else brought something with a fuse and a story. A boy with a radio that only sang if his grandmother pressed on the dial. I soldered the loose connection while he told me facts about outer space that made my eyes sweat. A woman with a rice cooker and a husband-shaped hole. I swapped the thermal fuse, and we stood listening to the first rolling boil like we'd called a spirit back, and it came. And then there was Noah. She arrived with a film camera and a clear bag of batteries that had never been batteries. "I teach art at the middle school," she said, cheeks wind-burned, hair in an argument with gravity. "The shutter sticks when the cold gets honest." I knew how to unstick what cold takes. We tested the shutter, tried it at 1 second too. It blinked open and shut like a heartbeat deciding to trust. "Coffee?" she asked, a question unadorned by strategy. We began meeting Sundays along the bluffs at dawn. She forgot gloves, I brought extra. She forgot to charge her phone, I carried a battery that could have powered a moon. She framed the bridge as if it had a secret. She taught me that light at sunrise lifts the edges of things first. I taught her to zip a lens cap tether to a carabiner so it spends less time in the grass. Love did not arrive. But something like a room with the windows already open did. January thawed and froze, practicing the math of becoming water, and then deciding against it. Sloane texted occasionally, photos of murals half-finished, apologies that sounded like poems, links to songs about forgiveness performed by people who could sing. Dinner, she wrote once, as if dinner were neutral, as if casseroles didn't remember who stirred them. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, because saying nothing sometimes keeps a promise to the person you are becoming. I took Noah to the repair cafe instead. She helped a kid whose flashlight flickered when he shook it. She showed him how to seat the battery snug and proud. He lit it under the table, pointed the beam at his own palm, and gasped at his bones. We all love seeing the structures inside us when they glow. At home, I hung a second set of oven mitts near the door. I labeled the breaker box with a tidy hand. I left a small kit of AAAs and earplugs in the lobby for whoever needed sleep more than they needed silence. None of it was heroic. All of it felt like Watcher finding the low places and making them livable. One night, the neighborhood lost power for 6 hours. I rolled out a cord from my little generator to the elderly couple downstairs and boiled water on the camp stove. Strangers appeared from the stairwell, bringing mugs that looked like the 1970s and gratitude that looked like this century. Noah arrived with a thermos and a bag of oranges. "If this is a cult," she said, "your merch is excellent." We laughed because laughing is how humans ventilate rooms with no windows. It would be neat to write that Sloane saw the lights in our alley and understood something about how care works across thresholds. Maybe she did, walking home on a dark street. Maybe she didn't. Healing doesn't need an audience. It needs a table and better chairs. On the morning the city exhaled frost, I tucked something small and steady into a film canister in Noah's jacket pocket. Not a vintage heirloom. Reliability has its own elegance. We climbed the ridge where the water throws light back like a compliment it means. I had packed a first aid kit, 2 hand warmers, a foil blanket because love is partly anticipating discomfort and partly refusing to let it win. We didn't speak for a long time. The fog lifted. A heron decided to trust its legs. "People have told me I'm too much," I said finally, like a hardware aisle with feelings. Noah snorted. "And I've been told I show up late to my own life," she said, kicking at a patch of snow that glittered like the hard kind of hope. "But I am here, and you are the reason I remembered gloves." "Check your pocket," I said. She did. The lid stuck like all important lids do, asked for patience, then opened with a small, satisfying pop. The ring was simple and sure. "Yes," she said before I asked, which is one definition of belonging. I asked anyway, because ritual holds its own heat. She said yes again, and a gull laughed like a god with a sense of humor. We walked back down past the community garden and the defiant rosemary bush that thinks winter is a rumor. I left a spare smoke detector battery on Mrs. Green's stoop with a note. "Knock if it chirps." At the corner, a mother was wrestling a stroller one-handed and a bag of groceries with the other. I carried the bag to her porch and she cried and then laughed at crying. In the afternoon, I fixed a kettle that belonged to a woman who used to run marathons and now runs soup to shut-ins. The whistle returned to it like a bird to a palm. On the way home, I saw Sloane across the street, wearing the coat she paints in when it's too cold and she refuses to admit it. We watched each other for a breath and then we didn't. There is generosity in staying on separate sidewalks. There is mercy in letting the light fall where it falls and not trying to steer it. What happens next? We buy a second set of cleats for the trail because someone will forget theirs. We keep a flashlight by the stairs because ankles are fragile and darkness is not personal. We celebrate solstice with our own ritual. A teacup we pass between us on the living room floor, naming what we set down, naming what we carry. We keep the ring clean, the batteries charged, the door unlocked when the neighbors need heat. Some people call that controlling. We call it weatherproofing, the art of making winters survivable for everyone inside the house.